Hey, it's ShadowACS again. Dystopian futures are not a new thing. They've been around for decades, from old movies like Blade Runner to much older works like 1984. It's a classic genre, and for good reason. Creating a futuristic world invites near infinite possibilities for creativity, and having that future be dark, oppressive, and controlled by evil forces amps up the suspense and drama. But every so often, a story will have a sci-fi world where you're not really sure if it's right to call it dystopian or not. This is ShadowACS. ShadowACS is an anime that I heard quite a bit about when it first came out. It took me a while to get around to actually watching it, but now that I have to say, I really liked it. One thing I do appreciate about it is that it's a dystopian future anime that doesn't feel like it's trying to shove an agenda in your face. Which is not to say can't be done well, obviously 1984 was about fascism. I'm more referring to things like The Purge and Dead Man Wonderland, where you're supposed to go, oh, look at how horrible humanity is for allowing these things to happen, when they're doing things that would obviously never happen if this kind of future were to occur. ShadowACS doesn't really do that. It just presents its world, tells its story, and you can take what you want away from it. It's more along the lines of Blade Runner in that respect, in that there isn't really a single solitary message it's trying to force on the audience, but rather just a couple interesting ideas to play around with. In fact, there's even a point where they reference the book that Blade Runner was based on, which is maybe a little ham-fisted, but still pretty cool. Anyway, let's take a look at the story. ShadowACS takes place in a future world where the government has developed mind-reading technology. In this future world, scanners are set up all over the place that can peer into people's brains and instantly determine their fitness for society. This technological breakthrough, called the Sybil system, can determine what kind of jobs people are best suited for from a very young age, and if someone is about to do something bad, they're immediately quarantined and sent to therapy until their, quote, psychopath reading becomes stable. Sometimes people never recover and are permanently flagged as latent criminals, and have to be kept isolated from the world. Geez, talk about the punishment coming before the crime. Our main character is, kind of amazingly, not a boy in high school. God, how often do we see that? Instead, it's a young woman named Akane, who's just joined the police force as a junior detective. Her job is to track down latent criminals and bring them into therapy, or possibly kill them if they become too dangerous. She also has a team working under her of people called enforcers, who all happen to be latent criminals themselves. Yes, apparently the only thing latent criminals are really allowed to do in this world is become the government's attack dogs, and track down other latent criminals just like them. Why they specifically need latent criminals to do this, I don't really know. It seems like it would be a lot safer just to use ordinary people, but nevertheless. One of the enforcers working under Akane is a man named Kogami, who has an obsessive grudge against a criminal he once failed to catch named Makishima, a villain whose plan slowly becomes revealed throughout the story. So yeah, the whole thing is pretty much a cop show / crime drama set in a dystopian world. When I figured that out, the first thing that came to my mind to compare it to was Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. And some would argue that that's a bit of an unfair comparison, since after all, that anime is such a revered classic. And yes, I do think that on the whole, Ghost in the Shell is probably the better show. It has smarter themes and makes you think a lot more, while having a world that has a lot more layers to it. But in terms of just the sheer enjoyment value I got out of the story and the characters, I actually liked ShadowACS a bit more. And to explain why, I suppose the best place to start would be the characters. Akane is a very good lead. The best thing about her is her arc throughout the story. She starts off as the naive rookie who studied all the police work you can imagine, but hasn't learned any of the hard lessons that come with actually doing it. And throughout the show, we see her gradually learn those lessons. She has to go through a lot of harsh experiences and is eventually able to transform her naive sense of justice into genuine purpose. She feels like such a different character in the end of the show than in the beginning, and it's all done very subtly and smoothly. I love characters that have arcs like this. And then there's Kogami, who I think is just friggin' cool. I've seen him before on several women's lists of their favorite sexy anime characters, and even as a heterosexual male, I can kinda see why that is. He gets the whole brooding tough guy with a tortured past thing down perfectly. What I really like about Kogami, though, is that he isn't just a victim of society and that's it. He actually is kind of insane. Between his constant obsession with his past, his uncanny ability to see things from criminals' perspectives, and his outright bloodlust whenever he's going after a bad guy, you can see why he's labeled a latent criminal. I think that makes him much more interesting than if they had just made him a good guy and that's it. But you can still care about him and get invested in the growing friendship between him and Akane. Akane also has another more experienced detective working with her named Ginoza, who's my example of how to do a character that doesn't always get along with the main lead without it necessarily being annoying. He's very cynical and doesn't always see eye to eye with Akane's naive ideals about what a detective should be. But you can tell that his cynicism comes from experience, and the conflict between the two leads to some memorable interactions and good character development. In fact, Ginoza has a character arc that's about as well developed and strongly put together as Akane's. One that ends in a more tragic place, but still feels appropriate for the character. And then there's the villain, Makishima, who is just friggin' awesome. I'm not gonna act like this guy isn't a complete cliche, but in my opinion, it's all the fun cliches you want to see in a great villain. His devious voice, his eloquent Bond villain-like way of speaking, the image of him casually sipping a cup of tea in a high-rise apartment as he looks down at all the chaos his plan is causing. What I especially love about Makishima, though, is that you almost kinda want him to win. His plan is to take down the Sybil system, and yeah, we kinda want to see it go as well because of what a terrible thing it is. And if anyone's gonna try to argue that maybe the Sybil system isn't so bad after all and it's what humanity really needs, no. Yeah, I have no idea if this anime has that kind of fan base or not, but in case it does, the answer is no. No, it obviously fucking isn't. The thing that makes Makishima a bad guy is that he's a violent murdering psychopath who will go to any lengths to get what he wants. I love villains like this where you want to see the heroes beat them, but a part of you still kind of wants to see them win. The one thing about Makishima that I felt was kind of forced and unnecessary is that they keep building up how there's this epic rivalry between him and Kogami. Like, they keep talking about how they were always destined to fight each other, like they're Batman and the Joker or something, and I didn't feel like this story really earned that. When I look at these two, I just see one of the main heroes and a bad guy. I didn't really get a sense of this deep connection they were trying to build up. Anyway, let's talk about the world in this show. Of course, the main thing everyone remembers about it is the Sybil system, the Psycho-Pass readings, the Enforcers, all that. And yeah, it's a really creative concept and it's very well done. But there is more to the world than just that. They could have just had this show set in a version of modern-day Japan where the Sybil system exists, which would have been the generic, lazy way to do it. But instead, the whole thing has the look and feel of a really good sci-fi show. Most of it takes place in metallic, industrial environments with all these deep blues and grays. It looks really good. If I had to nitpick something wrong with the world in this show, it'd be that the future technology they have, aside from the Sybil system, isn't really all that original. Like, they have holographic room projections that you can program to be whatever you want. Okay, that's kinda cool, but we've also sort of seen that thing before. And they have online virtual reality chat rooms, which again is pretty cool, but Ghost in the Shell already did that. But I'm just trying to look for problems here. The Sybil system is supposed to be the main focus of the show's world, and it's the part that's done the best. So before I wrap this up, I need to talk for a bit about the second season, which is simply and appropriately titled Psycho-Pass 2. From what I've gathered, a lot of people don't seem to like this season, and while I'd hesitate to call it bad, it's definitely not as good as the first. I should point out that this is one of those second seasons that's really more of a sequel than a continuation. It's like the later story arcs of Sword Art Online. If you just watch the first and skip the rest, you're not missing anything. And even then, it doesn't really feel like a sequel as much as a half-assed rehash. It's only half as long, and the setup for the story is pretty much exactly the same. Some crazy anarchist is building a cult following to try and take down the Sybil system, and Akane and her team have to try and stop them. And don't get me wrong, the story is paced fine and flows fine, and I did kinda want to see what was gonna happen. But a lot of what made the show so great in Season 1 just isn't there anymore. Akane, for example, doesn't really have a character arc in this season, which makes a lot of sense because she already went through all her character development. The first season was about her growing from a naive rookie into a skilled detective, and now she's just a skilled detective. She's by no means unlikable, but she's just not as interesting. On top of that, Kogami's pretty much not in this season, and most of the rest of the original cast either have little role to play or were killed off in Season 1. And the characters they replace them with are just not as good. Akane's new partner, for example, is a pain in the ass. I fucking hate this character. Now, I kinda get what they were trying to do with her. They wanted to make her like Ginoza was in the first season, where they had someone who would conflict with Akane a bit, and that would lead to interesting interaction. But what made Ginoza tolerable was the fact that you knew his cynicism was coming from his own harsh experiences. He was a veteran who Akane had to learn from. This girl is just a jealous, naive brat, who's constantly going out of her way to sabotage Akane on missions just because she doesn't like her. I mean, they make her way more unlikable than they need to for this story to work. The villain, by any normal standards, is a good villain. He has an interesting backstory, and I like the reason they give why the Sybil system can't target him. But you're always going to be comparing him to Makishima from the first season, who was a terrific villain. Of course this one isn't going to be as good. And it really doesn't help that, again, they're pretty much just trying to do the same thing as they did with Makishima. We go from one anarchist trying to take down the Sybil system to another anarchist trying to take down the Sybil system. It's like why so many people hate Nier from Death Note. He's by no means a bad character, but it's hard to love him when he's obviously just a weaker rehash of a beloved character they already had. Again, I can't really bring myself to say the second season is terrible, but it's definitely a lot worse than the first. And like I said, you can pretty much skip it and not miss anything. As for the first season though, I definitely recommend it. It has great complex characters, a memorable world, and a terrific villain. If you're into sci-fi dystopian anime, or even not, I'd say ShadowACS is definitely worth giving a watch. Check it out and see if you enjoy it. This is ShadowACS, and I'll see you next time.